Guramahagut Cairn Corla, Taoiseach, like others, I want to speak about the terrible events unfolding in Israel and Palestine, and I want to, on behalf of Labour, condemn outright the appalling slaughter by Hamas of civilians at the weekend. The targeting of Israeli civilians, of women, of children by Hamas was appalling, horrific to see, and we believe the hostages must be released, and my colleague Deputy Brendan Howlin has made that statement on Sunday. Since Saturday, we've all watched in horror as we've heard more detail about the attack. An attack on young people attending a music festival, on children in their own homes, and the thought of parents who are still unable to make contact with their children, not even knowing if they are alive or dead, is unbearable. The thought of an Irish citizen, Kim Danty, being among those who are now missing and whose safety is unknown, that's unbearable. And our thoughts of all of us, I think, in this House, certainly those of us in the Labour Party, our thoughts are with her family and with all those affected. Our thoughts are also with the people of Gaza today. At the weekend, we in Labour called for restraint to be used by Israel in response to the Hamas attack. But since then, we've all watched in grave dismay as Israel has unleashed missile attacks on Gazan residential areas, has cut off vital services to the civilian population, has effectively placed the people of Gaza under siege, indefinitely it seems, with over 1 million children now being subject to collective punishment in Gaza without any way of escape. And these actions by Israel must also be condemned outright. Indeed, both the Hamas attack and the Israeli response have already resulted in thousands of civilian deaths, and we're seeing the region being plunged again into a terrible abyss of violence, with neither side to benefit and civilians bearing the brunt. Taoiseach, there are two statements about the situation which should not attract controversy. One is that, of course, Palestinians have the right to assert and defend human rights in the face of decades of oppression and occupation. And both I personally and the Labour Party have a long track record of supporting Palestinians' right to self-determination. But the actions of Hamas in deliberately targeting civilians must be condemned. Israeli citizens have a right to go about their business without fear of attack. And a second statement is also important and should not be controversial, that the Israeli government must be condemned for engaging in collective punishment. They must be condemned for besieging Gazans, for targeting civilian infrastructure, and for breaching international law. These two statements should not attract controversy. It's a zero-sum game in international politics where they do, and where it's thought that you can't say one and the other together. The reality is, despite the awful conflict deepening, despite the issue being raised so often at international level, the international community has failed ordinary people in Israel and Gaza, and in Palestine generally. And right now it's impossible to see a situation where matters do not get worse. So Taoiseach, you know a diplomatic failure at international level does require a diplomatic response from us in Ireland as much at international level. At an international level, what is Ireland's response to the conflict? How will the Irish government continue to work both at EU and at UN level? It's important that the government condemn not only the brutality of Hamas, but also the siege tactics and breaches of international law being deployed by the Israeli government. And how are we in Ireland working to bring international pressure to bear, as you've just said, to calm the situation, to restore the focus on building a two-state solution, a lasting peace settlement in accordance with international law?
Taoiseach, please.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Deputy, and I agree with your broad comments. Those two statements should not be contradictory, and it is very sad that in so many parts of the world, in the US, in large parts of Europe, it's not possible to say what you said. Thankfully, in Ireland, it is possible to say what you said, and Palestinian people do have the right to self-determination and to seek the establishment of their own state, their own homeland. That does not extend to attacking music festivals, taking hostages, attacking children, the kind of things that Hamas has done, which fundamentally undermines the cause of the Palestinian people and weakens their case for statehood. And when it comes to Israel, what they are doing in Gaza is not acceptable either. It's not okay to cut off power supplies to civilian populations. It's not okay to cut off the water. And it's not okay to target civilian infrastructure. And I think we're all very clear on that in this House, across the different parties. And it's a good thing in Ireland that we can have at least that level of consensus on this issue. In terms of what we can do, we are engaging with our partners at UN level. There was an emergency meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Ministers yesterday, which the Taoiseach participated in, and we're making a very strong case for restraint for de-escalation. We don't want to see this flare up in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in other places. That plays into the hands of Hezbollah, into the hands of Iran, into the hands of the extreme right in Israel. So we want to make sure that we don't see an escalation. And also we'll very strongly make the case continuously for continuing humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people who are innocent victims in all of this.
Ivana Bacik.
Well, I thank you, Taoiseach, for that response, and I agree that it's good to have a level of consensus in this House and indeed in the country on the appropriate response to this horrific violence that we've seen unleashed. I do believe it's very positive to see Ireland as a voice at EU and international level, a voice calling for restraint from Israel following the events of the weekend, a voice for the continuance of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine. I think that's very positive. It would be very positive too to see Ireland taking a strong position on support for Palestinian statehood, to take a very strong position on support for the Occupied Territories Bill, which we in Labour were proud to support and help Senator Francis Black shepherd through the Seanad. So we believe there is a need, I think, for that unity of purpose on Palestinian rights to self-determination to come forward from this House and from this country, while at the same time, as you've said, we must be clear about condemning outright the brutality of Hamas, as we saw at the weekend. And I would say this also, that there is an issue at domestic level too, at national level, where we've seen a real toxicity in public discourse on social media. And I think in Ireland, home to so many tech giants, there's also, I think, an important role for Ireland to play in seeking regulation of online discourse to ensure that the sort of toxicity of debate, where those two statements I've made are seen somehow as contradictory in some quarters, where that can't be allowed to undermine efforts to achieve a peace settlement for the sake of all of those children in Gaza, for all of those children and civilians in Israel too.
Taoiseach.
We often talk about the term culture wars, and I'm not even sure what it means sometimes, but some of the discourse that I've seen online makes it feel like some sort of culture war, that you have to choose sides and you have to be either entirely on one side or on the other. We all know that the world is more complicated than that, and wrongs have been committed on both sides. This conflict has historic origins, wrongs done to the Arab people of Palestine, and also wrongs done to Jews in Europe and in the Arab world. And any conflict has a historical context, and I think we all understand that and all bear that in mind. And certainly the position of Ireland, as I said in my earlier response, is to use our influence to the extent that we have it, and we do have some, in the UN, in the EU, to call for restraint, to call for de-escalation, to call for respect for basic human rights and decency all around, and to continue to support the humanitarian efforts of agencies and the UN in particular on the ground.